Hi everyone. Let's talk about material representation in architectural drawings. We'll start off by talking about texture and pattern, and then take a look at what those architectural materials are. In the next video, you'll see some examples of how these are used in architectural drawings. So let's start with a definition: texture. Texture is the surface quality of an object. It can be described as rough or smooth, and you can imagine feeling it in your hand. As an artist, we use lines, dots, patterns to visually depict the three-dimensional texture in a two-dimensional way. There's two types of texture in art: actual texture and implied texture. Also called physical or tactile texture, and visual texture. Pause this video for a second and take a look at Van Gogh here and see if you can identify an instance of actual texture in this scene. And then see where in this image is an instance of implied texture. All right, this image is a great example of texture. We have a lot of implied texture, stippling or lines to suggest texture on an object. No one actually thinks that the air behind him physically has this texture to it. All right. But there's also some examples of actual texture in which we are mimicking, Van Gogh is mimicking the real qualities of an object. For example, the wrinkles in his jacket, or maybe the texture of his hair. Let's see another example, maybe a little easier to understand. And you can see that this basket, I think it's a small basket, has an actual texture. If you were to reach out and touch this object, you could trace that texture with your fingers. All right. And it also, the mug to the right has implied texture. It's suggested. If you reached out and touched that mug, you would not be able to feel any of those lines. Here's another example of this same idea from a different book. All right. And on the left, we have a column of physical texture. All right. And on the right is some examples of visual texture. It says, we use the term texture most often to describe the relative smoothness or roughness of a surface. It can also describe the characteristic surface qualities of familiar materials, such as the hewn appearance of stone, the grain of wood, and the weave of a fabric. This is tactile texture that can be felt by touch. Visual texture is the representation of the structure of a surface as distinct from the color or form. It can be either felt or perceived in a drawing. All tactile textures provide visual texture as well, but visual texture, on the other hand, may be illusory or real. So let's move on to our next definition. If that's texture, what is pattern? Well, pattern is the arrangement of forms or shapes to create an orderly whole. And we use pattern in our designs as an opportunity to use value, line, and shape. Okay. And when you're using pattern, it's important to use correct proportion and size. So here we have some patterned pillows. Here's a couple of different types of pattern. A motif is a repetitive and decorative design. An all-over pattern has motifs used in a planned or predictable way. And then a random pattern will use a motif, but it's scattered and it's unpredictable. So let's bring back those pillows and maybe take a look at these vases also. And let's see if you can tell the difference between an all-over pattern and a random pattern. Can you identify the motif in each of these patterns? Pause the video and see what you can find. So we talked about texture and we've talked about pattern. Now let's talk about materials and how do we represent them in our drawings. Surface rendering is the name for the combination of real or actual textures and patterns to communicate design intent. Let's bring that back to design intent. And as such, it's very important to interior design and architectural drawings. Materials provides an opportunity to show pattern and texture of the building elements and furnishings. They are a simple way of distinguishing the qualities of a space. And an important note here is that we render materials to scale. So here is a just high-level list of the kinds of materials you might come across in an architectural drawing. Right? You're going to continue to study architectural materials in your next classes. And this is just a brief overview of what they might look like. So starting with the furniture category, you could have wood grain or fabrics. In the flooring category, tile, many types of tile, and wood plank. Moving to the exterior of a building, we can have different types of siding materials, including brick, stone, and wood siding. And there's lots of roofing materials, including tiles, shingle, and metal roofing. I've grouped this last category under reflective. All right, we can have glass. We might use water in our design. And there's other metal objects. Now I cheated a little bit on this last one. It's not a pencil rendering, it's a marker rendering, but it was so awesome that I couldn't resist. All right, everyone, this was an introduction to the idea of material representation in architectural drawings. And we learned some basic definitions of texture, pattern, and materials.